Okay, well, everybody, welcome, everyone. I'm Mike Riley, Director of Parks at Montgomery County. I want to thank everyone today for joining us today for the next very exciting session of the Montgomery Parks Speaker Series. We have a great session today, a panel discussion looking at how communities can reimagine their public spaces so that all people feel they belong and are welcome within them. This topic is very timely as Montgomery County Parks is in the process of finalizing our long-range plan for parks as we speak. It's called our Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Plan. This is a policy document that guides future development for our park system. It's the plan that focuses on how we can provide equitable, active, central, inviting community spaces for all members of the community in our diverse county. Just a few fun facts about our agency. If we are new to you, we are a state chartered bi-county agency serving an increasingly diverse population of over 2 million residents in the 2 Maryland counties, abutting our nation's capital here in DC. We have won an unprecedented 6 gold medals from the National Recreation and Park Association for our incredible and vast park system here in Montgomery and in Prince George's County. Just a few quick housekeeping notes before we get started. The session is being recorded for future viewing. It will be posted on our website. We will have a Q&A session immediately following the presentation. You may submit questions throughout the presentation via the Q&A box, and we'll try our best to address as many as we can during the last 15 minutes of our time here. This session has been approved for continuing education credits from the Landscape Architects Continuing Education System and the American Planning Association. Please find a link in the chat box to sign up with your email if you are applying for credits. Today, we're pleased to have Bridget Marquis as the moderator of the panel discussion on the topic of reimagining the Civic Commons. Bridget will expand upon this topic, introduce our panel in just a moment. Bridget is the director of Reimagining the Civic Commons, a national initiative for transforming public spaces to foster engagement, equity, environmental sustainability, and economic development in cities. She manages the National Civic Commons Learning Network, housed at U3 Advisors, providing coordinated learning, impact assessment, and storytelling across 110 U.S. cities. Bridget is a frequent speaker and author on reimagining public space as a critical civic infrastructure for resilient communities. Please join me in providing a warm welcome to Bridget as the moderator of today's session, who will introduce our esteemed panelists. Take it away, Bridget.
Great, thanks, Mike. Good afternoon. I'm really excited to be here and share the stage with our panelists and really be here with so many people who are thinking about parks and public spaces and communities really every day. I'm Bridget Marquis, Director of Reimagining the Civic Commons, and on today's event, we're going to be spending the next hour really exploring alongside practitioners in 3 cities who are working to demonstrate the power of public spaces where everyone belongs. So I'm going to do a quick introduction of our panelists. We have Demetrius Lambert-Falconer, who is Chief of Community Engagement for Summit Metro Parks in Akron, Ohio, a park district that manages more than 15,000 acres throughout 16 parks, 3 nature centers, and over 150 miles of trails. Alexa Bush, who is a program officer at the Kresge Foundation's Detroit program. She's a licensed landscape architect and previously served as urban design director for the city of Detroit. And George Abbott, who is Director of External Affairs at the Memphis River Parks Partnership, where he leads marketing and communications, development and programming for 6 miles of riverfront and 5 park districts along the Mississippi River. So I'm going to start by just framing up the session a bit around our current global pandemic that we are still living through after 2 years. It's really proven and underscored the significance of face-to-face human connection to our daily lives and well-being, and the importance of a robust civic commons, of a connected system of high-quality public spaces that deliver real outcomes for communities has never been greater. But even before COVID-19, the US was in the grips of increased economic segregation, social isolation, and distrust. Trends from over the last 50 years show that we are more segregated by income than ever before, that the proportion of American families living in predominantly low income or predominantly affluent neighborhoods has more than doubled since 1970. And while racial segregation has declined somewhat across the US since 1990, in many cities, it's still persistent and deep. We also don't know even those who live closest to us. In the US, a full third of us don't interact with our neighbors at all. We've designed our communities in ways that make opting out of public life much easier than opting in. And this is at a time when health researchers are pointing to the direct link between social isolation and physical and mental illness, even premature death. And trust in all institutions across the globe is in decline. So is our trust in each other. 64% of US residents believe trust among fellow Americans is declining, and that this lack of trust makes it difficult to solve broad problems that require broad-based cooperation. So problems like the pandemic, problems like racial inequality and climate change. And while these trends that worsen social isolation, tribalism, and distrust have grown, our civic infrastructure, our parks and trails, our libraries and community centers, the very places that could bring us together have been overlooked. Our gathering places come at the bottom of nearly every municipal budget. They've been often seen as nice to have, but not essential. And when budget cuts hit, they're often first on the chopping block. As a nation, we've allowed our civic commons to erode. But what would a city look like that was putting every single one of its assets to work to connect people of all backgrounds, cultivate trust, and create resilient communities? This is the question at the heart of Reimagining the Civic Commons. Reimagining the Civic Commons is a collaboration of the JPB, Knight, Kresge, and William Penn Foundations, alongside local partners to revitalize and connect public spaces that exist in all of our communities. With a focus on 4 main outcomes: civic engagement, socioeconomic mixing, environmental sustainability, and value creation, cross-sector teams in cities across the country are demonstrating that strategic investment in our civic assets is a smart way to start rebuilding the social fabric of our communities. The social fabric so necessary for empathy and trust to flourish and to recover from the multiple crises we face. And let me pause here for just one moment on this outcomes slide. The outcomes orientation of Reimagining the Civic Commons is what defines this work. Public space is one thing, and a robust civic commons where we share space with people whose lives are different than ours is another. This is public space work in service to more engaged, more equitable, and more environmentally and economically resilient communities. In short, we believe public space can be, in fact, must be a solution. But to make public space investments wisely means reimagining not just the places themselves, but fundamentally changing how we design, manage, and operate these assets. In 2020, Urban Institute released a report on Reimagining the Civic Commons. And what they found is that by adopting a portfolio approach to civic assets, along with a commitment to real outcomes in communities, it's yielding 3 key changes in practice. First is more collaborative leadership models. Second is more strategic operations. And third, more innovation, really at every level. We've also recently released a publication called Place Driving Equity, an evidence-based action guide on the role of public space for shared prosperity, and a primer on socioeconomic mixing, a technical term for the simple yet powerful idea that repeated interactions among people of different backgrounds have the potential to bridge divides of race, income, geography, and belief. And with low barriers to entry, public spaces are uniquely positioned to counter the growing trends of segregation, isolation, and distrust. But this only happens if these spaces are designed, staffed, and programmed with these intentions. So today we brought together practitioners from 3 communities, Akron, Detroit, and Memphis, and they're going to share their work co-creating public places where everyone belongs. So we'll start, each panelist will be giving a brief presentation on their work, and then we're going to have a panel discussion, and we'll end with Q&A, as Mike mentioned earlier. So please go ahead and put your questions in the chat box as we go. So first up, we have Demetrius Lambert-Falconer, and she's going to share the work that she's leading in Akron, Ohio. Dee.
Hello, everyone. As Bridget stated, my name is Demetrius Lambert-Falconer. I'm a parkie that started my park career in 1991. So it's been a while, but I must say that my involvement in the Civic Commons, reimagining the Civic Commons, has been a journey that was a little different from the rest of my park life. So today I'm going to focus a little bit on civic engagement. So forgive me if I run a little bit over that value creation or some of the other pillars that Bridget spoke about, because one thing I found in this work is that you can't just stay in one bubble. You kind of bleed over into the rest. And that's kind of the magic that I think we'll be talking about here. Next slide. So one of the things I want you to understand is Akron. Akron is a fairly small city, or what we call a mid-sized city, with about 198,000 plus or minus a few folks. We're the 5th largest city in the state of Ohio. This particular asset ran throughout our city. If you take a look at the red line, that red line indicates what we call the towpath trail, the Ohio and Erie Canal towpath trail. That trail runs through our county, and I am Summit Metro Parks is a partner with the Ohio and Erie Canal towpath trail, and for years since its inception, we've been managing part of that property. There are 3 dots. Number 1, the Civic Gateway. You'll often hear me refer to it as downtown. Number 2, Park East, which is the kind of central exchange area there, high resident area. Then number 3, Summit Lake Park. Summit Lake Park is an interesting place because, yes, it is a park with a community center with baseball fields, soccer fields, a lake, an urban lake, and now a nature center. So Summit Lake Park. The next one. Signs of life. When we talk about civic engagement, we're talking about how do people use this space. These are 2 pictures from the downtown area in which just simply adding chairs. It sounds very simple, but I must say that in some of our areas, a lot of our areas, we didn't even have seating spaces. So beginning this process with reimagining the Civic Commons, we first asked folks, what did they want? Again, it sounds so simple, but it's not traditional within a lot of our park practices. Ask folks, what do you want? People say, I just want somewhere to gather. I want somewhere to sit. I want seats that I can actually get to without going down a slope when I have mobility issues. So we provided safe spaces, spaces where seats, spaces with enhanced lighting, and spaces with personal art. And when I say that public art piece, these are pieces that reflect the residents and those who are using the space. It brings a sense of belonging. So when we talk about civic engagement, these are all signs of public life. The next slide. In this slide, we talk about stewardship. How do you know people really are going to use this space and they really are becoming attracted or connected to the space? It's because of their level of stewardship. What they do in their free time when they're not being paid lets you know where their interests lie. So we have in the top left-hand corner there, we have folks who come out on the lake now who kayak after some environmental sustainability efforts, testing the lake, see it, is it actually safe? And I have to let you know that this urban lake was littered, I'm going to use the word littered, with a lot of myths from you're going to go in that lake and you're going to have 3 eyes when you come out. You know, the Ferris wheel is there. My husband still thinks the Ferris wheel is there, by the way. Just putting that out there. Lots of myths. So we began to change the narrative, did a little environmental research, saw what we were really working with. The lake is perfectly fine. And there has been a huge increase in recreational activities in this lake, from kayaking, canoeing every Tuesday, free after the farmers market, fishing programs. In the area, we now have a planted fruit forest or food forest that's planted nearby. And again, stewardship. In the lower corner here, these are folks that are part of a group called the Green Girl Gang. They come out every other week in their kayaks on their own personal time, gathering to clean up the area. So stewardship is another bit of evidence of civic engagement. Next slide. Again, continuing stewardship, we kind of took it to a different level. So we have those who are coming out and they're not getting paid and they're doing this on their free time in their leisure. However, we started to implement some things where people were getting paid. So we created the ambassador program. This was a program where we took local folks in the neighborhood, residents, and said, hey, can you help us take care of this? There was a lack of resources within the city budget to take care of this part. So some private foundations were able to collaborate with some nonprofit organizations and provide the ambassador program. That is the photo you're looking at here with the folks in the highlight yellow jackets. On the right-hand side, this young man here holding this plant, he's actually planting the food forest there. And he is a part of a group called Summit Lake Build Corps. Summit Lake Build Corps. These are students, children, residents in the neighborhood. Oftentimes they're saying, hey, I need something to do. Well, we want to give them something to do, but we want to also teach them skills that hopefully will benefit us in the park realm by creating a workforce down the line. So he is planting a fruit forest and these students are learning these skills and getting paid. Next slide. Advocacy, another bit of evidence toward civic engagement. So we have residents who are learning things, we have our youth who are engaged, and then we have our politicians, those who make a lot of decisions, and we're saying from our foundations, from our city council, our residents, everybody, our grassroots organizations, our varying municipalities, come into the fold, come to the table. Everyone has a seat and no seat is higher than the other. No seat is more important. And let's get in here and let's do what's best. And that is a sense of advocacy that honestly is self-propelling. The energy there, when one group gets tired, another group will join in and propel. And that advocacy will then lead us from a system of prototyping to permanence. Next slide. And that is what you're looking here. This is a view from the second level of the new Summit Lake Nature Center. In the beginning, 2017, with Reimagining the Civic Commons and the focus, we said, okay, ask folks what they want. They told us. We provided a pop-up nature center in an Akron Metropolitan Housing Authority's facility. One room, we rented that room. We tested the ideas. People began to really enjoy the programming. And the space, safe space to bring their children in together. And then we said, whoa, we can't leave. And now we have a permanent facility for all, equitable, affordable. Everyone comes. If you take a look at this picture, you'll see a variety of ages. You'll see a variety of faces, skin colors. This is a place for all. And at the end of the day, this is what it's all about. Next slide. So when we talk about civic engagement, I told you about the past, told you about the present, and now I want you to take a look at the future. What does the future hold? This again is the third location out of the three. There are permanent things and future plans for all three locations here in Akron and here at Summit Lake. The future is what we are now calling the North Shore Development Plan, where we've placing a trail completely around the lake and additional amenities that the residents ask for. So thank you. That's civic engagement with Akron.
Thank
Any
you.
questions?
Oh, not yet. We'll get to those in a minute.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, Dee, so much. I'm going to stop my share and I'm going to introduce Alexa Bush, and she is going to share the Civic Commons work that she's been doing in Detroit.
I shared my screen and my mute button disappeared. Thanks so much, Bridget. Good afternoon, everyone. Alexa Bush, now with the Kresge Foundation. Prior to this, I was working in our planning department at the City of Detroit, and excited to share with you our Civic Commons project. What we were focusing on in Detroit is really trying to rebuild our neighborhoods and thinking about how do we bring urban life back to places that hadn't seen investment in decades. And we really did that by centering our economic development strategy around public space. So what this looked like is we were looking in a district about 10 miles northwest of our downtown and focusing on a neighborhood called Fitzgerald. What you're seeing in blue dots here are vacant properties. So really focusing on a neighborhood adjacent to Strength, but that had seen a lot of disinvestment and had over 40% of the properties held by our public land bank. This was a really unique opportunity for us. Not only did we have a couple of university anchors nearby, but in this district, we had some of the highest income neighborhoods and some of the lowest. So to the north of the neighborhood, household incomes were about $100,000 a year, down to maybe $13,000 or $16,000 in Fitzgerald. So we really saw an opportunity to bring investment to this neighborhood that had been under-resourced, but the potential also for mixing across different economic levels, even in an area that was predominantly Black. And how this all came together was really a strategy that we tried to focus and locate a lot of these different investments co-located with one another. So as I mentioned to you, in the center, what's shown in green is a new park that we built on a collection of vacant lots that connected through the neighborhood with a greenway. We had a housing strategy that was intentionally developed around that park to think about not only how do we restore market value, but ensure affordability into the long run, as well as investing into an adjacent commercial corridor and thinking not only about small business, but actually the street as a place that could be safe, a place for mixing, and a place that was really centered authentically around small businesses that were local to Detroit. We didn't do this in a vacuum. Similar to Dee, we really engaged with folks throughout, not only in town hall meetings, but through testing and prototyping ideas in place, like you can see in the upper right-hand corner. As well as a whole constellation of other partners. So what we did in Detroit was the planning department was sort of the coordinating entity, not only to bring all the different departments of City Hall to the table to touch on all these aspects of economic development, but also to coordinate with our partners in the nonprofit sector, with private philanthropy and our institutional anchors. So the planning department played that role convening across all these implementing departments, who you can see some of which listed here. So as I mentioned, we really took a street that looked like this, that had been given over to cars and really had high vacancy, and reimagined it as a place that people wanted to be, with dignified transit, biking, shade, street trees. This is what it looks like in a photograph. We tested these ideas live with people. This is an event that we had called Spring Forward on 6 Mile, where we invited students not only from the universities, but invited residents across all of these different neighborhoods, and really focused on programming that could bring people together. So this is us with a hustle instructor doing the hustle on a vacant lot adjacent to the street. And it was really amazing to see the public life that just so wanted to be in a space, and that our job was really to try and improve the built environment to live up to that and think about these unique programming opportunities that would bring people together. We also invested really strategically into small businesses. This is Giovanna, who owns a coffee shop now on 6 Mile. She actually lives in the Bagley neighborhood adjacent. Next to her coffee shop, we created a pretty interesting partnership where we put a community design center in the neighborhood. So this was really meant to be a hub for all the parties involved. 2 of the nonprofit partners are headquartered out of this new space. There were hot desks for city staff to be able to plug in and talk to people as different projects were underway. And it's also used for community gathering space. This is an example of what that looks like on the inside, really active and lively. We thought too that bringing some foot traffic could help support some of these local businesses. It's been a bit on pause during the pandemic, but we really see the potential of this type of investment. We also have continued to think about that development story on these vacant lots by really investing in Black-led developments as well. So this is a vacant lot along the corridor that will be redeveloped into affordable housing with an arts component on the ground floor. Again, thinking about these ways to pull people together in the public realm. The other piece of the strategy relied on the neighborhood vision. So again, thinking of a new park, a civic space in the center of a neighborhood that would help drive a strategy of rehabbing vacant homes that were still in the neighborhood. So we worked with residents to design for what the park amenities would include, but also employed residents along the way in a really targeted workforce program to put residents to work clearing and preparing the vacant lots ahead of construction. We also gave out mini grants to residents to test out programming ideas while we were still in design. and really engaged with a local artist to use public art in the park to help people tell their story and leave it feeling like something that really belonged to people and didn't just teleport in from elsewhere, but really gave them not only a hand in developing the space, but in building it with us through a pretty unique process. So just some quick pictures of this is before. We had about 25 vacant lots in the neighborhood that became a new park. And this shows you some of the life that's taken place. Some of this is really intentional programming by our team, thinking about winter events, activating the park through the seasons, inviting people from all those neighborhoods to actually gather in a low-income neighborhood or lowest income neighborhood at night was a huge achievement of the project. We've also seen residents take on that stewardship. So this is one of our mini grantees who leads a hula hoop troupe who activates the space, as well as the day-to-day life that has happened given that culture of the park and the programming and amenities that were really driven through that feedback. And so I hope that gives you a little snapshot of what we tried to do to bring together civic life and the creation of these new public spaces.
Great, thank you, Alexa. And next we are going to go to George Abbott, and he's going to share the work that he's leading in Memphis. George.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Glad to be here with you, coming to you live from Memphis. Memphis is a mid-sized city. We're on the corner of Tennessee and Mississippi and Arkansas. So in Memphis, we are really lucky that we sit at what I would argue is the most widest and the wildest point on the Mississippi River. But for a long, long time, the river was really kind of back of house for the city. So it was the place where goods were brought in, loaded and unloaded. It was the city dump for a while, and really not a place that you would spend that much time. But our Civic Commons efforts, a few years ago, we started returning to the river, and our Civic Commons efforts started at the river, just about where you can see that yellow dot. And one other point to point out, we are, like Detroit, a very large and spread out city. We're about 300 square miles. So we have with about 1 million people. So we need to work really hard to find places that can pull people together across that geographic distance. So our projects focused on 2 formerly Confederate parks, the city's first library, and this trail that you see connecting the entire riverfront. Unlike many other places, we do have the possibility, just like in Detroit, we have co-location of some higher income neighborhoods and some lower income neighborhoods. Downtown is a mixed income neighborhood, but it's surrounded by a crescent of underinvested places that have been persistently poor. And actually 40% of the kids that live in poverty in Memphis live in one of that crescent of neighborhoods that surround downtown. There were many other obstacles to overcome, so a legacy of auto-centric infrastructure that had built up, things like this on our riverfront that people had to get past. Fear of downtown, fear of the river even. So we started with a pop-up. We wanted, before we made any capital investments, we wanted to see if people would actually return to this space, if they would take ownership over it. And so we closed one of those streets I just showed you and created river play right here with pop-up basketball, skating, and all sorts of kind of activations on top of this. A lot of partners were involved. Once we saw that we could attract people, that there was a demographic, that there was an audience for this space, we set to work making capital improvements on those 2 parks that I mentioned. So you see the park behind the street right there. This is another view of that park. It was previously named Jefferson Davis Park, so it did have a Confederate history, but aside from that, there was really not a whole lot there, just kind of an open grassy field with a pathway around it. That park became River Garden, which is the most popular gathering space on the riverfront at this point. We added much more plants and trees and native grasses, native meadows, a climbing structure, a pavilion. We put a whole layer of program on top of that. On the same day that we opened that park, we also opened the Riverline Trail, which is 5 miles all along the riverfront. And then with that park open, our our attention turned to Confederate Park, which sits just up the hill. This is a picture of Confederate Park, and this is not one of the official continuing education quiz questions, but I did think it would be fun to just see how many historical monuments or markers you can see in this picture. This dates back to, I think, 2013, so long before the Civic Commons was involved. The answer is 5. This was a park that was filled with historical memorabilia and markers. These are replica Civil War cannons, and really not a place that was not well used, very welcoming at all. So as part of the transformation, we removed all of that history, tried to restore the park to a neutral state, making it a welcoming and inviting place to be. We added these public art sculptures. So these are sculptures by Hank Willis Thomas that just added some animation to the park. We added many new trees. We even worked with this local group of artists on a project that we called the Peace Project. So we installed speakers throughout the park, and then this group of artists recorded guided meditations, guided programming that would play at certain times during the day, just to change the atmosphere of that space. You know, a space that had been a monument to division with a statue of Jefferson Davis in it began to change shape. But I love to include this photo in every presentation because this is last summer. We used this park as the host location for watch parties for the Memphis Grizzlies. And it is quite remarkable to look at this crowd, old, young, black, white, from all over the city, celebrating together. This is literally the spot where the statue used to stand. So I think it's a very powerful marker of how far we have come. One important thing I like to point out is the change that we made to our staffing model. So we moved to a ranger system. We previously had a maintenance staff. We expanded their responsibilities. We promoted them to rangers, and we asked them to serve as hosts for the space as well. We increased the pay, and essentially their job is to be welcome people, to help you enjoy the space, to fix any maintenance problems, pick up trash if there is trash, but really to be that kind of park host. And that has been very popular both with staff and with visitors. We've had people stand up to the mayor and tell the mayor that being in this park feels like being in a country club, but you're in a public park. And that's exactly the type of quality that we want to see. We've also tried to open up opportunities for staff to become leaders. So this is a set of our staff presenting to a group of the Civic Commons about the work that they do. So building their skills and giving them kind of ownership over the spaces that they manage. And when you look at the visitor counts, the demographics, we've seen great success there as well. So many, many more people, very diverse background, and in particular, we are now attracting folks from higher incomes that previously were not found in these spaces. We haven't lost the lower income attendees, but we are now attracting folks from a higher income all to share that same space, and there are many more opportunities for interaction between those people. And I would argue that the Civic Commons project that started 4 or 5 years ago has directly led to the project which we're undertaking now, which is to take our 30-acre riverfront park and undertake a $61 million transformation of that park. So just as I wrap up, I want to leave you with a few things, a few kind of lessons to take from our experience. Test everything that you do. We did not presume to know which activities would be popular, what type of programming would be popular. We did everything as a test before we invested significant capital dollars into it. Small changes can be big. So our park, we have the river, and then we have a harbor beside the harbor. The harbor is very safe water. There's no current, and it's really an opportunity. It's a great recreational opportunity that had not been seen as one. The same way that Summit Lake wasn't seen as a place to get out onto the water, neither was the harbor. Just by making kayaks available and by hosting some kayak events, we've seen that kind of elevate in the consciousness, and we've seen huge success of people getting out onto the water and using that as a recreational resource. Design is very important. So we have intentionally kept a very high standard of design throughout this process, and we've seen the payoff from that. I think we've seen in a couple of ways, not only in the kind of mix that we attract, but also I believe very strongly that when you as someone visiting a place feels that that place respects you, you are more likely to respect the space. So just looking at this picture, you see a lot of park furniture in the pictures that I've shown. We have not had a single chair or table stolen, and we've had very low incidences of vandalism on that furniture. Make it human is one of the most important points. So adding that friendly face of the park rangers, the staff selling food and drink, has really changed the atmosphere in our spaces. And finally, just focusing intentionally with every decision that we make on equitable outcomes has changed the way that we operate, and it's changed the way that our partners and the programmers of the space operate as well. So participating in Civic Commons has led to big changes both in Memphis and the way that we do business here.
Thank you, George. All right, I'm going to bring up our panelists, all three, and dig right into some conversation. So all of you touched on at least a little bit one of our outcomes, socioeconomic mixing, which is core to reimagining the Civic Commons. I'm hoping you might be willing to share from your experience one kind of surprising example of a practice, whether that be a program or design, communication, process, whatever it is, that you found particularly successful at connecting people with diverse backgrounds in the work that you've done. Alexa, can we start with you?
Sure. And I alluded to it briefly, but I think one of the big successes we've seen is this hula hoop troupe that has grown, so I mentioned we were doing some testing out on the streetscape, and we basically threw a big block party and asked people what they wanted to see. And a resident raised her hand and said, "Oh, I'm going to do hula hoop and bubbles." And we were like, okay, noted, hula hoop and bubbles. We have no idea what that is. And it's really this woman, Bernadette, who's like amazing. She makes the hula hoop, she brings a lot of bubbles, and she just teaches everyone to do it. I think it works because it's something that's like kind of silly, very low skill. You know, she is incredibly charismatic. It just feels very authentic. That I think that combination really pulls people together and gets them to physically engage with one another in a way that like they might not if it was a more formal or a more traditional type of program.
Great. Thanks, Alexa. I also know there's some research, and I'll have to find it after the call, but there's definitely a piece of research that talks about people moving in together and how that builds trust among groups. Dee, do you have a good example of socioeconomic mixing?
Yeah, so speaking of people moving, we have this activity called Balloflex. I saw it years ago somewhere, and the residents kept saying, we want to do something recreational. Well, we're a park, so we have trees and things like that. And I'm like, I don't know, recreation, let me find it. I can do bird watching. And we started Balloflex. Well, Balloflex has ballooned into a 3-day-a-week event. As Alexa alluded to, black, white, green, purple, all ages. We even do it for preschoolers. They all come, different ones come, and they do a lot of exchanging. And we recently, I popped into one of the classes, and again, it started at Summit Lake. Well, it's ballooned so that we do it multiple times. All of the presenters are now out of Summit Lake, that area, but we have people who are signing on. We do it virtually during the pandemic when seniors couldn't get out. And people are coming from abroad, and they're talking to each other. There's again, not traditional program. There's a time in there in the beginning and the end, and they have their exchanges.
Awesome. Thanks, Dee. George, how about you?
Yeah, well, along a similar kind of note, I think all of our programming has been focused on easy activities that don't require any specialized skill or equipment, or we provide the equipment. And so I always think of the skating events that we've hosted, because it is really fun to go out. You know, we get a DJ and we just have skates available for people to come and do sunset skating. And skating is very, some people are really good, but you can also be pretty bad at it and still have fun. So anyone can get out there, and we see all sorts of people turning up. Because you're sliding around on wheels, you really have no choice but to get in to bump into other people and to get in conversations with them. And so we see a lot of interactions coming that way. And it's kind of a unique thing, so it attracts people to come and do it, because it's taking place besides the river.
Great, thanks, George. I also want to just point out across the three of you, I know some of you refer to things as events, and I would say most of your things are recurring, right? So I know skate night isn't every day, but it's like weekly during the summer, monthly, okay. And I do think that's something else just to keep in mind, is like regularity of program to help people who maybe didn't get to show up the first time. They can bring their friends the next time, but that helps kind of build, especially when you're looking for diversity of people. Okay, we're going to move. We only have 15 minutes. We're going to move into kind of civic engagement. So I know I mentioned at the top of the hour the stat around the vast majority of Americans believe that trust among us is falling, and that it's making it harder to solve problems, right? And we have lots of challenges right now that we need to work through together. Can you tell me, do you see a role for your parks and public spaces to really strengthen trust and democracy at the local level? And if so, is there sort of a tangible way that you've elevated civic engagement through your work? Dee, I know you talked a lot about this during your presentation, but would love to hear, George, I'm not sure you mentioned it much, and then Alexa too.
Sure. We now have a variety of situations in which we started here at number 3, on that 1, 2, 3. And then all of the other numbered locations have also had the same experience, where the residents who used to refer to themselves as low man on the totem pole, or, oh, I'm just a peon, they are now sitting at the same table with the mayor. They call the mayor. Miss Finney calls the mayor. She does all the time. And now we have parklets, we have memorial parks, we have things spreading out or overflowing into the neighborhood in spaces that we do not have control over. So that civic engagement level has really been really good. And as far as the park is concerned, I'm tapping into fishermen. They do this for a living. Or they do this for fun. They've been doing this all their lives. So when I have a fish issue in the exhibitry, or I have some identification issues with birds, I can't figure out something, it's the practitioners that are out there on a daily basis. And now I've introduced iNaturalists to them. They didn't know about that in this world of conservation, and they are the practitioners, and it's a beautiful marriage.
Thanks, Dee. George, you want to go next?
Yeah, I would say I didn't mention it too much during my presentation, but I think one of the great things that Civic Commons has allowed us to do is to show up consistently, and to have the resources to do what we say we're going to do. You can go anywhere around town in Memphis and you can find people who are complaining about government. But they may not phrase it as government, but they're complaining that someone told them they were going to do something and it never happened. Or the park down their street looks like crap and no one's doing anything about it. And so I think with Civic Commons, what we've been able to do is go out, engage with people, create these pop-ups, invite people in, say, what do you want to see? And then actually go off and build it, right? So I think and then run it in a good way. So the more that we can do that, the more that we will restore our populace's faith that, governing bodies or authorities actually can execute on the promises that they make.
Thanks, George. Alexa.
Yeah, I would second a lot of what's been said about sort of rebuilding trust with government through following through on different pieces. I think for us, thinking not only about sort of low trust between residents and government. We had just come out of bankruptcy in Detroit when we started our project. So that was a big obstacle for us. But even between residents, we used a lot of this idea of pop-ups as well. I think I showed a quick example of some of the public art. We found that actually giving people a chance to like hands-on do work with us. I think as planners and designers, like we do that all day. We're like, oh yeah, here's the plan. Tell us what you think. It's kind of abstract to people. Letting people build the mural in the park through the process that we did, I think really changed not only how people related to us and the park asset itself, but to each other through that shared experience of sort of collectively working on something we try to incorporate now as much of that into our process, just because it yielded such great benefits in terms of people's engagement with each other as well.
Bridget, can I say one more thing about civic engagement? Because it just occurred to me, one of the things that I think I'm really proud of our staff, in that we engaged with our staff prior to, I think, 2018, whenever the census was. And we actually first made sure our field operations leader explained to everyone what the census was. We made sure we got 100% participation from our staff in the census. We then equipped our staff who are out in the parks every day with materials and information about how to complete the census and voter registration. And we gave them a little training on why voter registration was important too. Because we know that our parks attract a lot of people who are hard to reach through other outreach methods, folks that need to complete their census, that need to register to vote. And so by equipping our staff with the materials to do that and telling them why it was important, we actually got, I don't think we know how many census registrations we directly provoked, but the Census Bureau sent us a nice certificate, which used to be behind me somewhere, saying, great job on your census. So it must have been good. And I think along with some other groups, we registered to vote nearly 1,000 people in the parks before our mayoral and council elections in 2018. So that's been another good big kind of thread of our work. And I think it's something that a lot of nonprofits, a lot of public space organizations overlook because they don't see it as central to their mission. But the fact is, we've got the population that needs to use these services, needs to participate in the counts. And so we should do everything we can to reach them.
Agree. Thanks, George. We're going to shift a little bit to systems change. And I think, Alexa, you started talking about this a little bit, but you each started this work with kind of a particular footprint in mind, but have also been focused really throughout on systems change, but particularly in the last few years. Can you talk a little bit about how you're applying some of the insights and practices from kind of the original Civic Commons footprint and work to other sites and neighborhoods in your communities?
Sure. So in Detroit, I mentioned that we were really making the case that public space should be at the core of economic development. And I think what we were able to do was really get the mayor's ear on that and use that as our strategy citywide. So in addition to the Fitzgerald neighborhood where I talked about, we have something called the Strategic Neighborhood Fund that's focusing on 10 different districts across the city, similar, high income and low income neighborhoods mixed together. But it uses a similar planning process and then has dedicated funding to address parks and greenways, fixing up streets and commercial corridors. So kind of the small business work I mentioned, affordable housing. So looking at not only multifamily, but single family rehab. And so we sort of taken that model of thinking about those different areas of development and making sure that in each of these districts, there's a great park. We've thought about the street, we've thought about the commercial corridor, we have a strategy for housing, not only development, but also ensuring some long-term affordability. And so we were able to, use this as an example to springboard that strategy citywide.
Great. George or Dee, want to build on that for your own experience?
Sure. Kind of like what George said earlier, I think we are all learning. And when I say we, I mean the partners, Summit Metro Parks, as well as all the varying partners that were a part of the process. We're learning how to do business differently. And part of that is asking questions. So both the Metropolitan Housing Authority and the city are both doing strategic planning processes, land processes, land use processes, and they have had very, very high civic engagement opportunities, activities, bringing people to the table that ordinarily would not be at the table, where everybody's being heard. And I applaud them, because even at one point they said, you know, we have a really good sample of people. However, there's 141 units in this area, plus so many houses. We want to do a little bit more. So they threw the survey back out just a couple of weeks ago and, you know, tried some other things, because COVID obviously interrupted some things, but there is a very conscious effort not to move things according to our timelines as we've used to, you know, let's get it done, let's get it done. The effort is, let's be inclusive, let's be inclusive. And I think at the end of the day, we've found that we just get better products, that trust of the community is something that you cannot quantify. And I think that's just, you know, how we are benefiting from the process, the Civic Commons process.
George, do you want to build, or should we keep moving?
No, let's keep moving.
All right. So I'm going to go to some of the audience questions that are coming in. So one is for you, George, in particular, around research. So they mentioned that you obviously used some stats in your slides, and wondered if you use market research, or how are you doing data collection and other ways to understand what community interests, but I think also your impact.
Yes, great question. Data is very, very important, and knowing the effect of the moves you make will arm you with a much better case as you go and seek funding for whatever you're trying to do. We have a variety of ways of data collection. So we were lucky in that the organization I work for, the Riverfront Management Organization, was simultaneously undergoing a master planning process for the entire riverfront that included a 4,000 person survey across the metro area. So we were able to get data from that. We used, I think, but there is we've always been careful to try and separate out what people say from what they actually do, because we've seen a lot of people say in answers to surveys, I would never go downtown, I would never show up in these places. And then we produce a really cool event, and lo and behold, there they are. And so they're saying they would never come, but what they're doing is actually something different. And that's why we created the pop-up installation before we created these parks, so that we could say, look, it's not a crazy idea. If you give some people something to do, they will come and do it. And we, used during that pop-up, we would have people sign in if they were borrowing a basketball or skates, so we would get their zip code. We would do signups on Eventbrite, so we would try and get as good a picture of the people that were coming as possible. We roll out surveys on the riverfront from time to time strategically to capture counts, and also to interview people if they are willing to be interviewed. Obviously, you get much richer information, but you don't get as much information. And one thing I am working on right now is I've created a digital version of that survey that we are going to post out in the parks that people can use. Now that everyone understands what a QR code is, we are going to post QR codes out so people can give us live feedback as they visit the parks.
Awesome. Thanks, George. Alexa, I'm going to ask you quickly just to follow up, just for everyone who's out there, along with the outcomes, Reimagining the Civic Commons also has something called Measuring the Civic Commons, and a set of DIY measurement tools, which were deployed in all of our communities. And Alexa, I'd love for you to just tell the anecdote of kind of how that happened in Detroit and what you gained from having residents do lead a lot of that data collection work.
Sure. Great question, Bridget. So yeah, so Bridget mentions there's a whole metrics framework that you can find up on the civiccommons.us website. And, we talked a little bit about trust and civic engagement. In Detroit early on, we thought, okay, we're going to go door to door. We're going to do a neighborhood survey. We're going to do these things to find out, what's baseline, how are we changing the neighborhood? But, we didn't want to necessarily send a bunch of interns or city staff door to door. We just didn't think we'd get the same fidelity of information. So to really try and not only build transparency between what we were doing in residence, but also to just provide an opportunity for folks to try something out, we committed to hiring all of our data collectors from the neighborhood. So essentially the funding from Civic Commons, we were able to pay people $15 an hour to get trained and be canvassers, not only for a door-to-door survey, but also to do pedestrian counts, bike counts, observation counts, and help us really track how we were doing in the park. I'd say the most amazing thing that happened was, one of our longtime residents who's been a great partner, was quite supportive the whole way. But if you'd ask her, like, do you care about bike lanes in the beginning? She'd be like, no, why do I care about bike lanes? She conveyed to us, she's like, I was sitting out on McNichols, which is that street. I never noticed like how many people ride a bike, because in Detroit, a lot of people who are biking might not be able to afford a car or who have access. And she just had never spent enough time there, or, you're driving by in a car, you don't see it. The actual act of surveying completely changed her relationship to the neighborhood and other people who were using that space. And so, I could probably give 3 or 4 more anecdotes, but that was a really powerful one that sort of transformed her into a champion for bike infrastructure for fellow residents that she wouldn't have been, I think, outside of that experience.
Thank you, Alexa. Okay, we have 2 minutes left. So I think we'll just do one quick answer question to close. So if people take away just one thing from this panel, what do you hope that they'll remember and do? Dee, we're going to start with you.
Okay, she said one thing. Can I get you? 2, 1, unity. Utilize your nonprofit organizations, your civic organizations, the local quilting club. Utilize everybody. Everybody needs to be there and come to the table. Number 2, simply because I see a question over here, nature. Integrate nature throughout, because nature is this healing place. So regardless of the history of those spaces, what should have, could have, didn't, what the city promised or whatever, any plot of land, any opportunity to integrate nature along the way, do so. It's an easy button. It will work for you. I promise you. Okay.
George.
I think the one thing I would tell folks to take away is that there is huge potential in all of our public spaces. Every time it feels as though every time I read the newspaper, and I know especially with the audience here, with your proximity to DC, there's a lot of people shouting at one another. And we even see that here in Memphis too, especially online. That you can read, if you never visited the parks that we have and all you did was read about them online, you would believe some very strange things. But we have seen, like I said, people that would, sit down with me and swear blind to me that they would never travel downtown are now some of the biggest advocates for downtown, because they've been brought into downtown by invitation, right? And they've come to these spaces, they've enjoyed them, and now they see potential for this to happen in other parts of the city. So it may, I think, particularly in our social media age, everybody's got an opinion. A lot of people will tell you that it's hopeless and there's no point investing in these spaces because they'll just be graffitied or filled with drug addicts or whatever. I've heard all of those things, but there is great potential in our public spaces to be a unifying force in this country.
And Alexa, last word.
Sure. I mean, I think partnership, I think your organization is interesting because you have planning and parks all in one. I don't think our project would be the same if it was only a park or only a streetscape or only an economic development piece. It's that we brought all the resources and skills we had to the table together. The public realm kind of flirts through everything and it belongs to no single entity. So the more you can partner and think holistically, I think the better outcomes you can get.
Great. Thank you, George, Alexa, and Dee. I'm going to pass it over to Mike to close us out.
Well, Bridget, Dee, Alexa, and George, thank you so much for sharing your incredible and very important work with us, and congratulations on all your success stories that are serving your community so well. And Bridget, I couldn't believe when you ended with a one thing question, because I always preach to my staff, when you attend a training or an event or a seminar and you're inspired, sometimes you can make the mistake of being inspired in so many ways, you go off and you do nothing. So I'm always saying, always take away one thing. And my one thing is that I am a strong believer in the concept of socioeconomic mixing. We've been doing that in Parks and Recreation for decades, and increasingly so lately, but it's not a term of art I've been using, and I'm going to use it with our decision makers and elected officials ad nauseum going forward when I'm talking about how parks can play such an important role, parks and open spaces, and moving our communities and our country forward. We had a really successful salsa dancing event recently, and I was literally watching socioeconomic mixing without knowing, without using the term. I'm glad I didn't run around and say, great socioeconomic mixing, everybody. I probably would have brought the energy level down, but that's exactly what I was witnessing. And we just need to really consider in our public spaces and our events and our programs and our facilities how we're going to facilitate that more and more going forward. But thank you so much for the information you shared with us, and I really appreciate it. So to end, our next speaker series is set for March 1st. We'll be joined by founder of Harlem Grown. They're a nonprofit organization with a mission to inspire youth and to lead healthy and ambitious lives through mentorships and hands-on education in urban farming, sustainability, and nutrition. And then lastly, a recording of today's session will be posted to the website. So if you are inspired, please watch it again. Please share it with your colleagues. Those of you who are applying for continuing education credits will receive an email tomorrow with more details on that. But thank you all again for joining us. And Bridget, Dee, Alexa, and George, one more thank you, thank you, thank you. And that concludes our program today.
Thank you.